See, with the Old Testament and the New Testament, they come together. People say, well, why do you talk about the Old Testament? We just want to hear about the New Testament. You can't know about the New Testament if you don't know what was going on in the Old Testament. And when we've got people out there now saying that the flood never happened. But what did Jesus say in the New Testament? He says, just like in the days of Noah. It's real. And we have the evidence. Has anybody here ever been to the Ark? No? Just two of us? My folks actually had gone when it first was built. Well, I would highly, highly suggest it. It is phenomenal to be able to walk in to something that literally existed, to see the magnitude and the size of it and how it would have probably looked. Totally different than our perception that we always have. Well, it was built by Ken Ham. He actually had done the Creation Museum that's up north of Florence. And they didn't have enough land when he got the download from the Holy Spirit to build this thing. And so they went down to Williamsburg, which is about 40 miles south, and they bought 800 acres. And that is where the Ark resides. They're getting ready to build a replica of Jerusalem that you can go in. That's going to be really cool. So this is what the Ark looks like. To give you, we're talking cubits, so to put it into feet, so you kind of have an idea, it's 510 feet long, it's 85 feet wide, and it's 51 feet tall. That's a big structure. But if you put it next to some things, here's the Titanic. It's just a little bit over half of the Titanic. And if you put it next to the Statue of Liberty, it's just a little bit bigger than the torch on Earth. But who here ever thought about the Ark? You know, we see the pictures. In fact, most of them are in nurseries, and it's a boat, right? And they got animals, heads sticking out all over. And you think of it as just being an open boat, right? You got animals on top of one another, and you got the people, and you're on the stakes and the smells, and how on earth did they take care of anything? And, you know, that's not it at all. Did you catch that when I read that? God said it's going to be what? 3 levels. I love how they did this. Now again, they had to take some artistic licensure because we don't have the blueprints that Noah had. But I would say it's probably very, very close. So this is what the different levels would have looked like. And I thought this was fun because they went through and they figured out how many species, and this is by fossils and everything else, how many species would have been there prior to the flood. And then they figured 2 of every kind and 7 of every clean, and even if they figured double, it came out to like 6,200 species. But they needed 322,400 gallons of water. Then they needed 95,100 gallons of storage vessels. This was actually to collect the rainwater from when that water was gone. 400 tons of food, 15,000 storage vessels, 22 extra large cages, 186 large cages, 293 medium cages, 308 bird cages, 174 small cages. Oh, and this is really fun, the 415 amphibian pots, cages. You can look at those. So this was, I love this because, you know, we somehow think that in Noah's time, now you have to realize how many thousands of years had happened since Adam. Thousands, at least a good thousand. They were wise, they were smart. These are the cages, and they had these wonderful little wagons underneath it that, with a slatted floor that the droppings would fall in so they could clean the cages. And we're going to get into the water system and the food system a little later, but here's those little pots that I was talking about. So this is where the amphibians were. They'd be like little lizards and whatever fit in there. And these pots, they had like this cheesecloth over the top, and they could literally take some water and pour it on top of the cheesecloth, and it would drip down in, and that's how they got their water. They didn't have to open it. That's smart. You don't want bees flying around on the ark. And then they had these really cool things that were called moth pots. And I did have a close-up, but I didn't get it in here. So for all the lizards and everything that had to eat insects, these moths would produce, and they had like this little tube that went between there and their pots. And so the moths would fly in, and then it was like a self-feeder for the, that was pretty ingenious. But this is what the jars would have looked like, and we know that this is actually really accurate because Kristen and I saw this in Israel. These were the exact same, some of these, the same kind of vessels that they had. We had water ones and food ones, and then these are bundles of like what they would have tied up the food in. Now, here's where it gets fun. This great big vessel, and this is actually big. Who here has the dog water? You seen that? Salt water? You got the tank, and then you got the bowl. That's exactly what this is for the big animals. So you have the self-watering tank, and there's a tube that came out it, and like I said, it's 3 floors, so they had walkways up top. So that way the boys could walk across the top, and they could take the jars and they could pour it down the tube, and it would fill up that vat, and then it would water them. Same way with the food. They had like you think of a downspout, like a downspout, had a funnel at the top, and it came down into a little tray. So it was self-feeding food. So they really never had to get into the cages. It could be cleaned, it could be watered, and they could be fed. This was just really cool. They let you stand on the side and to get a picture, and you see the corridors down this whole 500 feet. And then they have some mock animals in there, just the different sizes, so you can see kind of what they were. Now this is the other fun thing, because the animals back then didn't look like the animals we have now. They were different, and they probably were a lot smaller, not what we would think. And you get in a couple, and they base this off of fossils that have been found. How about giraffes having short necks? So those of you who know, we have a podcast we talked about on the 3rd and 4th episode. We really got into this with creation and the dinosaurs and how they fit in and how this works. Well, giraffes wouldn't have needed to have tall necks back then because the dinosaurs did. They would have been eating all the trees up top. They'd be getting kind of the middle stuff. So and this would be like, and they probably took smaller ones and whatever. But here we go. So now we have them growing their vegetables and herbs. Well, they would have needed it to start over, and they would have needed to survive. Which is kind of fun to see how they had, and they were all alcoves. So like I said, you have this big wide, and it's 85 feet wide. And so they had cages, 2 of them on either side with the center, and then on the outside edges they had for storage, and on the upper floor, the 3rd, is where they stayed. And each son and his wife had like an alcove. Well, why would they not? God didn't expect them to be on top of each other and in squalor. And I love this part. They had in Noah's a place for all these scrolls. Now we don't know, but I have always argued all along that he was holding on to some of the scrolls from Adam and from Enoch. And that's how he got it to this day. So this would just been what maybe some of the living quarters would have looked like, just for fun. And they put in there that they had a woodworking area. Well, they're going to need to build and fashion homes afterwards. And then a blacksmith. Now, how would that work? Well, they had the kiln, and then it was piped up so the smoke could go out, and they did the same for the stoves. Again, we don't know, but it could be. Now, perspective. Here's the other thing that we don't think about at that time. I don't know if you're like me, but you've always just pictured this ark, building this boat out in the middle of nowhere on this flat ground, nothing around, there's just some people. There were cities. There were cities, and they were worshiping these fallen realms, these deities, and there were temples. This was big. This is why everything was so corrupted. Besides the angels mingling with women, and besides them having the giants and the DNA being corrupted, that's why Noah was chosen. It says he was unblemished. He was unblemished is the same word in Hebrew in the scriptures as they used for the sacrificial lamb. He was untainted. Perfect DNA. So when we think about the flood, we don't think of it coming in and crashing through these cities and these temples. At least I didn't. It was interesting to see that depiction. So Noah was 600 years old when the flood before the flood. And according to the scriptures, they didn't eat meat. Even the animals didn't eat meat. That's why the dinosaurs back before that, before everything was corrupted, did not eat meat. They were all herbivores. It took Noah 100 years to build that ark. You know how long it took for this ark to be built? I was blown away. So he had the idea in 2006. By the time they had the idea, they got there, they built, and they excavated and poured concrete. But when the first timber was cut in Colorado and shipped to Kentucky, and it was set down, and they started building, it was June of 2015, and July 7th of 2016, they had the grand opening. Now, and Noah didn't have to contend with elevators and red tape and food courts and gift shops and all that stuff that's in this ark. They did that in a year. So yes, could Noah have done it in 100 years? Oh yeah. And again, they weren't uncivilized. They had tools, they had mechanisms, they had ways to do this. Hence why it wasn't just the outside, they had plenty of time to do the inside and make it just as God had told them. Now these are the things that God did for this whole thing. He gave the blueprints, just the sketchy ones were told. But you know, Noah had the whole thing. God brought the animals to him. Did you catch that? He didn't tell Noah, go out and start scavenging them around and trying to corral them and get in there. He says, no, God brought them 2 by 2 to the ark and they entered. And then, what was the big thing that most people don't think? God shut them in the ark. Now, when did they go in the ark? 7 days before a drop fell. Methuselah was his great-grandfather. Methuselah was the oldest living man, and his name literally means his death will bring destruction. Now, it's Hebrew tradition that Methuselah died the week before the flood. No one knew this. So when he died, it wasn't a, oh my gosh. They were prepared. They knew what was going to happen and why. I was actually, Karen's cousin came up from Florida, and her husband, he's actually a retired Methodist minister of 14 years, but we were chatting and I let her know we'd gotten home and that kind of stuff. And she says, you know, I've been praying about stuff and maybe some ideas for your sermon. And I love what she said. She said, you know, I was thinking about the trip there, the awe and the wonder of the ark encountering God right there in the ark. And I thought about that with Noah. I was like, well, yeah, can you imagine what that would have been like? You would have your undivided attention. How long were in the ark? A year. It rained for 40 days and nights. But they were in there for a year. She said it was the burden in not being able to help and the not control over the situation. And I thought about that with our trip. That's, for those of you who know Karen, well, she has the van, and it's set up for her to be able to drive it, stand controls. But I can't drive it. Well, I had to back it out once on my knee, but that didn't. I wouldn't want to be driving across the country that way. So yeah, well, you're at the mercy of someone else, but there wasn't, oh, you're getting tired, let me help take over for you. No, it wasn't any of that. And I was thinking about the different burdens along that trip, being able to move her from the chair to the bed and back and forth. And some of the things I could not alleviate, but there were things that I couldn't do. I thought about that with Noah. I thought about the people. We don't know how many sons and daughters he had. We only know the 3 that were saved. Not being able to ease the burden, knowing what was coming. It had never rained. It had never rained. It had misted from the ground. So when God said, I'm going to cause a flood, did Noah go and say, what? Were the people mocking him? Yeah. You know how far away you are from water? There was water, but what are you making? What's a flood? But see, God knew that because of everything being so far removed from what he created and called good, he didn't completely call it quits, he couldn't, but he made a covenant with Noah. And then he made another covenant with Abraham. He made another covenant with Moses. And ultimately, the final covenant was with who? Jesus. It was a really neat structure they had. It's called the promise of the rainbow. And you can't really see all the little details, but to appreciate it. But it's beautiful. You know, God said in the scriptures, I am going to put a rainbow in the sky as a promise and a covenant. See, we think of contracts. We're used to that, right? Contracts can what? They can be broken, they can be ripped up, they can be torn, they can be changed, they can be dissolved. But a covenant is made with blood. It is binding. It is not a contract. God said the rainbow is going to be that sign of the binding blood that was shed for you. So I'm going to get on my little soapbox. I was going to make one, but I didn't have time. The rainbow is a covenant. It's not meant for the Wizard of Oz. When you really think about it, I know a lot of people like that. It's what? The Wizard of Oz, and there's witches all over, and that's not what God intended. I'm not going off of the Wizard of Oz, just that rainbow is special. It's not meant for a social agenda. It's a covenant. It's special. It's sacred. Anything else that we use that for, that would be like using the cross and profaning it. So how does this all work out with the end times? We talked last week about the Feast of Trumpets and the 10 virgins, right? 5 had enough oil for the whole duration, and 5 that didn't. See, this is what I've been wrestling with so much. This is that whole not having the control and not being able to ease the burden, is because for those 5 virgins, it was not their responsibility to provide enough oil for everyone. The others could freely get it, and they chose not to. See, it was not Noah's responsibility to get everybody on the ark to save them. But I'm sure the burden was just as hard. Everyone themselves had free will. See, with the Old Testament and the New Testament, they come together. People say, well, why do you talk about the Old Testament? We just want to hear about the New Testament. You can't know about the New Testament if you don't know what was going on in the Old Testament. And when we got people out there now saying that the flood never happened. But what did Jesus say in the New Testament? He says, just like in the days of Noah. It's real. And we have the evidence. That's in Matthew. He says, but in the days of Noah were, so it shall be with the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So here's the thing, folks. It's because the covenant, multiple times, that God could have called it quits, but he didn't. He sent a sacrificial sign in the sky to remind us every time it rains just how much he loves us. And the cross has been there from the beginning, 2,000 years, for that last and final covenant of redemption. That mural that I showed you with the flood crashing in over the cities and the temples, there was one end on that picture that hit me so hard. We don't think about that. It's a mom with a baby and she's desperately reaching up for some person to save them as the floodwaters are crashing. See, here's the thing. It didn't have to be that way. It's kind of been the banner tagline for the last couple months. It didn't have to be that way. Things could be so much easier if people just cooperate. If people would just. All they had to do was turn to God. And hardest time, and yet here we are today. And guess what? It still doesn't have to be that way. There is going to come a time, just like when God closed Noah in, he shut that door. The scriptures say, the gate is narrow. And when that door is shut, and they're pounding on there to the bridegroom, let me in, he's going to say, I do not know you. If you were one of those on the outside and maybe you're feeling a little light on the oil, I would encourage you to take hold of the covenant, to take hold of the promise that God has for you. And I don't care how much sin and baggage you had hanging around your neck, it's because of that cross and because of the free gift that we can be released. It can all be gone. It's a lot to chew on. And while you don't have a whole year tossing around in a boat to think about it, I encourage you to go home. Spend some time with God. Ask Him if your perception is reality on some of these things. And ask Him if maybe you've been holding out until that last moment. I've heard many say that. I'll accept Jesus when I'm on my deathbed. That time may never come. You could go in the blink of an eye and never get that opportunity again. So don't wait. Think about it and do it today.